Today we're going to be talking about a source evaluation method called C.R.A.A.P or C.R.A.A.P for Mr. Ryan King's class in order to evaluate internet sources that you might want to use for your paper. The point here is to make sure that they are academic enough and that they're coming from a reliable enough of source in order to cite and help you to defend your argument, to make sure that you're using sources that will allow you to do that. So I'll show you where the link is if you want to follow along, or if you want to check this later outside of the video. If you go to the Penn Manor High School library page, and then under More, there's Research Guides. And from there, you can click on Ryan King Source Evaluation. So all the links that I will link to for examples come from this web page. So when we take a look here at this site, you'll see, again, the acronym is C.R.A.A.P, C.R.A.A.P. And the goal here is to use these criterion to figure out if the source we're using is good enough or not for academic standards, for a research level. And in certain cases, it might be okay for different levels. But you're at the point now, especially with a senior level paper, where you have to have a pretty high, we have a pretty high expectation for the sources that you use. We want to make sure that they're good. So we're going to look at these 5 areas, and as I said, I'll share an example. The first is currency. Currency at first seems pretty basic. Make sure the article isn't too old, but that does depend on your topic. It can have a huge impact on your argument if you're using sources that are way out of date, and it can kind of skew your argument. But sometimes you just want to make sure that you're up to date on what's going on in the field, that you're sort of aware of what's happening for the argument that you're making. And I'll use a short example here. So here's an article that was published, and we'll see, just take a second to load. So ESA's New Vision to Study the Invisible Universe. It was published in 2013. So we're looking at almost 7 years old. If we were to look through this article and to actually sort of read it, what we find is one of the claims that are made in it is that we cannot measure gravitational waves. It talks about the limitations of this and why this is problematic, and why we probably will never be able to measure gravitational waves. And then we jump to an article not that much older, only 3 years older. And here we have the New York Times article telling us that within those 3 years, we were able to detect gravitational waves. And this was kind of a huge discovery, really altered and changed some of the preconceived ideas, some of the arguments that physicists had. And if you were doing a paper on gravitational waves and did not include this, that would be a huge problem. And so you have to be sure that as far as currency goes, you're not leaving out stuff that has happened recently in the field that you're looking at. So make sure you're exploring that as you look up the topic. We'll use another example here of a article that is just simply too old, and it talks about user fees in public schools. Are they legal? And if we take a look at this article, it is one of the topics that you can select is about fees in schools. And you can see this one is from 1992. The fact that this article is so old for our purposes, other than sort of looking at it historically, it makes it irrelevant to the main argument that you would be making. I mean, we're talking about fees in modern school and in public education right now, not fees in the late 90s or the mid or the early 90s in this case. So that makes this a little less less useful. It might just something that you might not be able to use. So if you run across this article, if you're doing this topic, you run across it in JSTOR, this would not be an article to make use of. I will say, you see the login information came up here. The login is available on the database page if you go back there, and there will be another video that will show you how to get home access to the databases. That's something different. So for now, we're just using these for examples. I'll jump back, and here we are. So currency. Back here on the main page, just to sort of wrap up with currency, just be aware of how old your articles are, and especially in the science and the health fields, this can be a big deal. Sometimes you're allowed to use articles that are in certain disciplines. You can go back for an English article. You might have used sources in Frankenstein that were 100 years old. But if you're talking about developments in genetics, you have to be careful using stuff that's old because it could just be wrong. The next area for evaluation is relevancy. When we talk about relevancy, we're looking at one, that it's that it actually relates to your topic, and that it is discussing or analyzing what you are discussing and analyzing and actually applies. There's a clear connection. But on top of that, that it's of the right level for your argument, and that it's providing the right type of material. So let's look at a couple examples. This first one is one where it appears at first that this article connects to one of the topics on your paper, but at a closer look, it does not. And the title is very misleading. Even though it's in a database, it's kind of labeled incorrectly. It talks about the fees of public in public schools, which again is one of the topics that you have. The problem with the article is that it makes this argument that in some extreme cases that women mothers have had to become prostitutes in order to pay for their child's schooling. The problem with the article is, one, I mean, again, notice the date. The currency is bad right away. But two, the article itself is actually about private schools, even though it says public schools at the top. It really is not, even though at first it seems like, and what we've had students do is they've typed in, school fees, and they get this article and they think that it applies, but you have to actually begin to read through it and read it closely and see that, like, oh wait, this is not what I'm actually talking about, not what I'm actually working on. And sometimes that happens. We have we'll have referenced articles or articles that are cited that are sort of out of nowhere. We're not really connected to the main topic. The other problem that you can have with relevancy is you'll have an article that is way above or over your level of understanding, or way below your sort of your level of understanding. And so here's an example. If you are on JSTOR, if you do use JSTOR, and you start writing about a topic that you have maybe a limited amount of knowledge on, you've got to watch out for some of these articles. And I mean, this is just one I use as example only because I simply don't know what DNA-dependent protein kinase in a non, you get the idea. Basically, from the outset, if you're looking at a JSTOR article and going, wait, what? I don't understand half those words in the title, that's a problem. And you'll want to stay away from articles like that, articles that are sort of written for people, for scholars, for people who are working in the field already and are already experts in the field. That's not the type of sources you want. You want ones that are more accessible. And JSTOR has some of those too, but it also has some that are really difficult. And then you have the other end of that. You'll have something where you'll have an article and it's too basic. It's a kid's health article, really breaks down things into really sort of a simplified, sort of childlike, elementary level. We don't want to see that on your works cited page either. So be cautious of those and make sure that that's not there. All right, that is the end of part 1. Click on part 2 to continue the presentation.